So there are a lot of really interesting story details that popped up during Metroid Dread, and I wanted to talk a bit about them in this video here because there's a lot to go through. And of course, naturally that means discussing spoilers. So if you have not played Metroid Dread, if you have not finished the game, please come back to this video afterwards because there will be spoilers. I will be talking about the ending and various other events that happen throughout the game. That is your only warning. Now's your chance to click away. So the first thing that I want to go into really is sort of the Chozo, because there's a lot to unpack here as the game goes along. But once Samus lands on the planet, we get that first tease of her fighting the Chozo warrior, and then that's sort of the setup for the game. And then we don't really get any story developments until halfway through the game, which was really surprising because I was expecting a lot more cutscenes to happen more quickly than that. But no, it's mostly gameplay until halfway through the game where you get this massive lore dump of a cutscene, which is really awesome. And that's right when Samus gets captured by the purple Emmy. The Emmy gets deactivated and Samus turns around and there's a Chozo behind her. Another Chozo that's not the one that attacked her. This one is benevolent. He reveals his name is Quiet Robe, and he reveals that the Chozo that attacked Samus is named Ravenbeak. And this is where things really get interesting. Quiet Robe is a member of the Thoha tribe, and Ravenbeak is from the Mawkin tribe. And Quiet Robe goes into explanation about what happened on SR388 during what we saw in Samus Returns. The Thoha tribe came to SR388. We saw the whole thing there. They discovered the X and they created the Metroids. They also had assistance from Mawkin soldiers to protect the scientists during the creation of the Metroids. But apparently, after the Metroids rebelled, the Thoha wanted to blow up the planet. They deemed it too dangerous because of the X and now because of the Metroids. So they requested more assistance, and Ravenbeak showed up, and when he found out what happened, he ordered his soldiers to execute everyone on the planet, except for Quiet Robe. He did this because he had an obsession with power. He has this massive ego and thinks that he should be the one to rule everyone, kind of like Mother Brain, and I have a theory about that I'll talk about later on. And he wants to use the Metroids for power. So they went back to ZDR and he used Quiet Robe to experiment on the local bioforms. And as we see in the memories of the game, Experiment Z57 was created by Quiet Robe. Quiet Robe helped hack the Emmy, various other things that happens. But what's really interesting is that Quiet Robe mentions that the Metroids were programmed to identify the Mawkin as enemies. This is a really confusing detail to me because that implies there was a civil war before, or some sort of conflict. It implies that the Thoha recognized the Mawkin were not to be trusted. And considering this is the first time the Mawkin have ever been mentioned, it's kind of interesting, and I'm not sure how that fully fits in with everything else that we've learned up to this point. All the Chozo we've seen in the manga and in all the other games have been Thoha. And I presume all the statues and items and power-ups are from the Mawkin because the Mawkin are the military faction. That's my guess. I'm not fully sure how that works, but the Mawkin were never mentioned in the other games. So there's something there that needs to be explained. It's a bit too vague. But yeah, when they returned to ZDR, one of the Mawkin was an X and the whole planet got infected. They created the Chozo robots to contain the Mawkin soldiers in Ellen, and the planet, I guess, healed itself over time. But before this happens, we see that the Mawkin captured Kraid from Zebes. It's not fully confirmed if it's the same Kraid or if it's a clone, but it implies that it's the same Kraid, which means the Mawkin went back to Zebes. My guess is the X that infected the Mawkin remained hidden for years. He didn't spread throughout ZDR immediately. It waited many years until the Chozo let their guard down, and then it spread throughout the planet. That's the only way it all sort of fits in. I feel like they might have to remake Super Metroid somewhere down the road to sort of make that fit in, if that's what they're trying to go for. Interestingly, though, the body we see in Super Metroid outside of Kraid's room, we all thought that was Weevil all along, but this kind of implies it could be a Malkin. Again, if they remake Super Metroid, they could probably tie that in somehow, but as of right now, that whole thing is very confusing. But the most exciting part is that Samus fucking talks. That blew my mind. She talks. I mean, I was hoping she'd talk throughout the game, but she only has one line of dialogue, but it's still... She talks in Chozo. And I was so giddy when I saw that. I know I mentioned in my last review that I didn't really like the story that much, but there were some really cool moments. That was one of them. When she talked, I lost my mind, and Quiet Robe was such a cool character, and the animation and emotion that comes through from him, you really feel for this guy, and then he's killed 2 seconds later. In Metroid fashion, you know, everyone Samus meets dies, so Quiet Robe, it's tragic, and you really feel bad. But obviously when Samus releases the X, Quiet Robe gets infected and he reactivates the Emmy, but he says the line, "I'm counting on you," which is also the last line he says to Samus before he gets killed. So, and as we see at the end of the game, Quiet Robe assists Samus. The QRX, as everyone calls him for short. It's a fitting name. I quite like it. So that's what I'll refer to him as well. QRX helps Samus turn back to normal. So what I don't know if the Emmy were reactivated because Quiet Robe still had consciousness and he reactivated the Emmy as a way to help Samus awaken her powers because he knew that was the only way she could defeat Ravenbeak. It's not clear. I don't have a solid theory on it. It's very confusing and vague. But that's his whole thing. The finale is where the real sort of juicy details come in. I was confused at this at first, but at the end of the game, you talk one last time with Adam, but it's actually Ravenbeak. And I didn't realize this until I started talking with people in groups and stuff, but apparently Ravenbeak was Adam throughout the entire game. Doesn't make any sense to me, but I can kind of see how, in a way. Like everything else in the story, it's a bit weird, but hey, we got that interesting reveal after that. That ties into the manga. Holy shit, they tied Metroid Dread into the manga. They referenced the manga. Zero Mission was the last Metroid game to reference the manga explicitly. Technically, Other M did with Adam Malkovich and Samus's backstory, technically, but Zero Mission was the last explicit reference to it. So to have Dread reference that scene where Samus gets that infusion of DNA, my jaw hit the floor. I almost screamed. And he says, you see that Ravenbeak was in the shadows during that whole scene and he gave Malkin DNA to Samus. No idea why, but you know, the Chozo could see into the future, so I wonder if Ravenbeak had a premonition that she would become a warrior and did it so he could influence her. Not sure, but either way, if the Malkin were on Zebes during that time, that explains, you know, the items we see on Zebes, her power suit, things like that. And of course, you know, I just read the manga for the first time last night, and I noticed there's a scene where Old Bird introduces the Metroids to the Chozo on Zebes. He mentions that he gathered all these Chozo from all across the galaxy. So I can see how it fits in there that maybe Ravenbeak was among them, and this is how he first discovered of the Metroids, and that's when he went to SR388 after that. I think it's a sort of personal theory I'm percolating in my head. But no, Ravenbeak, in a weird Darth Vader twist, considers himself Samus's father because of that. And he also reveals something that was truly obvious to all of us, but Samus is the last Metroid. But the really incredible thing about it, the best thing to come out of Metroid Dread, she actually transforms into a Metroid. It was weird not having any actual Metroids, but having her turn into one blew my fucking mind. The suit takes on this really badass green and red look, and it looks like Dark Samus. I love that reference because Dark Samus was a Metroid originally, so it makes sense that there's that little reference there. It's so cool and vicious and organic looking. And she has the hyper beam as well, and that whole final battle with Ravenbeak was just something else. I wish she kept the suit. I wish it was a permanent thing that she had going forward, but I'm not sure what happens. But QRX sacrifices himself to Samus and she loses the Metroid suit and goes back to normal. I'm not sure if that means she no longer has Metroid DNA or if she's like the Incredible Hulk and it's like a power she can bring out to the surface if she's angry. Nothing's really explained there, but it's really cool to see it come full circle. The word Metroid, for those who don't know this, the word Metroid in Chozo means ultimate warrior. And it makes sense now when you think about it, that the Thoha created the Metroids to identify the Mawkin as enemies. It makes sense because the Metroids would then be the ultimate warriors. They were the Thoha's way of defending themselves against the Mawkins. But now that Samus is a Metroid, she literally is the ultimate warrior in every sense of the word. She already was the strongest warrior in the galaxy, but now she is a Metroid and she has that whole aspect going on. And that's incredible. My grievances with the story being vague aside, it has some really cool twists, like I just mentioned right there. And those moments are just, oh my god, they really get you thinking, especially the whole quiet robe scene. I had to think heavily about that afterwards and the implications of that. But one thing the game doesn't mention, and you'll only catch on to this if you're very observant, in Ferenia, if you pay attention to the hieroglyph artwork in the background, you can clearly see the Mawkin and the Zebesians. They had some sort of connection there. I'm not sure what that means, if it's just solidifying that the Mawkins were on Zebes, or if it's trying to say that the Mawkins were in league with the space pirates, which would mean Ravenbeak could potentially have been influencing the space pirates throughout the entire Metroid saga, which makes a lot of sense because they mentioned that they have allies in the Federation who are like spies and stuff, and maybe it was the Mawkin, and there's some very interesting implications there. But again, I feel like they'll have to remake Super Metroid or something for it all to fit in nicely. You have to squint for it all to make sense, but there's a lot to percolate and speculate over. It's really fascinating stuff. So while I don't like the fact that the X-Parasites were in the game again and how it doesn't make sense, we got some really badass moments with Samus. She's the strongest she's ever been, and she literally is the ultimate warrior now. It makes me kind of hope that the next Metroid game is titled The Last Metroid. That would be really fucking cool. Don't know if they'll do that, but that is something they could do. I didn't like how the ending was vague, with how she literally blows up Kraid X, which was really cool to see sort of Kraid's face split open and like Ravenbeak inside. I just wish we could have fought that thing instead of being a quick time event, but whatever. And after that she flies off into space and that's it. There's no tease for the next game or anything. This is where my problem with it being a conclusion comes into play. There's no resolution because the Federation had no stakes in this plot. They're mentioned in the very beginning and they sent the Emmy to the planet, but that's it. They don't have any role in this plot. They seem to have forgiven Samus. She's not a fugitive anymore. The animals, I was really disappointed they weren't in the game. I never really cared for them that much before, but going into Dread, I was like, you know what? If this is a conclusion, there needs to be something there with them. I guess they're in Samus's house or wherever she lives and she has them as pets. That's the only explanation I have. disappointed they weren't involved in the story again. Are the Chozo officially extinct? Quiet Robe mentions that all of the Malkin were infected by the X, and it's implied that all of the Thoha were slaughtered on SR388. So Quiet Robe and Ravenbeak were the last of their kind. But going back to the manga, you had Platinum Chest and Oldbird, who I guess were Thoha, and along with the other scientists and stuff on Zebes that fled into space and were never seen again. We don't know their fate, so they could still be alive. So the fate of the Chozo is, we have no clue. Their fate going into it is the exact same as it was before Dread. We have no clue what's really going on there. The X-Parasites, how do we know they're not on other planets? This is like the third time they supposedly went extinct. I find it hard to believe that they're really gone this time. And as I mentioned, the whole thing with Samus's Metroid DNA. But apart from all that, the story had some really cool twist moments, and I really liked hearing Samus talk and Chozo. I really wanted, in my trailer reactions I said this, I wanted the Chozo to talk. Even if they don't talk in like English, I wanted them to talk like how the Luminoth did in Metroid Prime 2. Have them speak in their own language that's subtitled. And they did. And I'm so happy they did. Getting that whole monologue from Quiet Robe was just fucking awesome. Grievances aside, it was an amazing scene. Heartbreaking to see him get killed though. Yeah, there's just so much to think about. I don't really have anything else to add on top of that. I'm going to spend the next few days sort of scouring my mind, piecing things together. And if there's any theories and anything else I come up with, I'll do more videos on it. Next though, I'm going to have to do a video on the whole Mercury Steam situation. You're probably familiar with what's been coming out about the studio. To keep it short here at the end, a lot of content was cut from the game, over an hour of cutscenes, which would explain why the story is vague. Well, it actually explains a lot. That'll be my next Dread video, going into that whole situation, my thoughts on that, and we'll see when we come to that. But yeah, what did you think of the story for Metroid Dread? Of everything I mentioned here, what are your thoughts and opinions? Do you have any theories on how the Malkin captured Kraid? How we didn't see them during the manga? Where's Oldbird? Is he still alive? What's the whole thing there? Is there a civil war? I want to hear everything you have to say down in the comment section below. And yeah, with that all said, thank you all for watching and please subscribe. Novus Corvus out.